Okay, so we'll start the session. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Firstly, I would like to thank all the participants for taking the time out from your busy schedule joining in today. With me today, Ashish Somaya. I think he doesn't need any sort of introduction. He's the most dynamic leader in the industry. Just to give you a little bit of introduction about Ashish, because some of you might be listening to him for the first time, or when we are putting up this video on YouTube, some of them would be listening to him for the first time. For their benefit, let me have the privilege of introducing Ashish. So Ashish has taken over as Chief Executive Officer at White Oak Capital Management recently. And before that, he used to work for Motilal Oswal as a Managing Director and CEO of the company under their AMC arm. And under his able guidance, AMC grew from 1,000 crores of assets to almost 40,000 crores of assets. In fact, I had an opportunity to work with him during that time, and I've had an opportunity to learn a lot in terms of what is so-called equity investing. So thank you so much, Ashish, for accepting our request and agreeing to come on the call and speak to our investors. Most of the investors have already joined in today, and today we'll be discussing about the topic, which is I think is very close to our heart because our full-time job is to sort of work in this area, which is called alternate investment funds and portfolio management services. So the way we've structured the organization is our attempt is to build the digital platform or an ecosystem where we kind of specialize in alternate investment funds and portfolio management services. And we thought you would be the right person, none other than you, who can throw more lights on this subject and share more learnings, because under your guidance, when you were heading Motilal Oswal AMC, you have also developed and helped the entire industry to grow the PMS industry per se. So we thought we'll try and learn more from you today in terms of what are the benefits of investing in alternate investment funds or portfolio management services. So there's one small story which reminds me. I remember when I used to work with Ashish, and I went to Nasik from Pune, and he came from Bombay, and we addressed the investor community over there. And from there, same day we went to Aurangabad, and from Aurangabad, very next day we went to Nagpur and did a couple of road shows. So I would have done more than 200 road shows. So what differentiates Ashish is that he's always ready to speak to investors any point of time. Even if you wake him up at 4 o'clock in the morning, he would ready to come and speak to any of the investors and share his learnings. And that is what differentiates Ashish from any other CEOs and MDs in the industry. So thank you so much once again, Ashish, for accepting our request and talking to our investors. So the format of the show is very simple, Ashish. What we do is we run the show called Ask the Expert, wherein we invite industry experts like you. We try and read your mind in terms of what do you think about the market. So we'll come to that also, and we'll also talk about how do you select stocks at White Oak Capital Management? What are your investment approach, etc. But before that, I've got a lot of requests from a lot of investors, and all of them are curious to know that there has been huge amount of value migration from physical savings to financial savings in India. And at the same time, there has been a value migration from mutual fund investors to PMS and AIFs. I mean, this is the industry trend that I'm saying. I'm not saying that, this is good or this is bad. So we want to read your mind and understand more from you. What are the 3-4 things which comes to your mind which differentiates PMS and AIF from mutual fund? Over to you, Ashish.
Sure. So, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me that generous introduction. It's very kind of you. Coming straight to your question, yes, what you mentioned about people moving from, let me not say people moving from, but let's put it this way, that the space of PMS and AIF is growing much more faster than the space of mutual funds. Let's put it that way. And just to give you some numbers, because you mentioned about, your and my working together at our previous organization, which is at Motilal Oswal. I remember end of 2012, early 2013, when I was appointed as CEO of Motilal Oswal, more like 8-9 years back. The entire equity mutual fund industry, the size of equity mutual fund assets was approximately in the range of 1,75,000 crores. At that time, pure equity AIFs or the whole concept of AIFs was more or less non-existent. The AIF regulation was new. So you can say that AIFs were practically at zero. And I remember equity PMS, what we have discretionary equity PMS was less than 10,000 crores. So where was the numbers? AIF zero, equity PMS less than 10,000 crores, and equity mutual funds about 1,75,000 crores. Approximately where we are today. The AIFs, and I'm not talking about venture funds and real estate funds or real estate investment trusts and all. I'm only talking about typically what is Cat 3 AIFs, which are investing predominantly in equity. I think they are close to 1 lakh crores. PMS is just north of 2 lakh crores now. And the equity mutual fund industry is about 14 to 15 lakh crores. So what has happened is the equity mutual fund industry has gone up, let's say 8 times, maybe 7 to 8 times. In that time span, equity PMS has gone from less than 10,000 to over 2 lakh crores. And AIF has gone from 0 to 1 lakh crores or higher. So there are reasons for this. First reason is, if you ask me over the number of years, what has happened is that the mutual funds have faced 3 types of, challenges. One is that as the scale and the size has become bigger and bigger in the last 2 to 3 years, very narrow economic performance and a lot of reasons whereby performance has kind of been sluggish, and at least the outperformance over the benchmark has narrowed down or has been, a negative alpha in recent times. Second is, if you ask me, the whole, investment latitude has shrunk because, now the regulator defines what is large cap, what can a large cap fund do, where they can invest. And everybody, if it is large cap, it has to be in the top 100 stocks. Mid cap is the next 150. So investment latitude has shrunk. The third is, I think, commercial latitude also has shrunk because when you really look at a equity mutual fund, there is basically a direct plan and a regular plan. And then there is no way to calibrate, or you cannot have performance linked fee. Nowadays, for example, a lot of guys in PMS and AIF, they invest with a 0 fixed fee and a pure variable fee. Like, for example, at White Oak, we have, performance linked fee, which is only related to alpha over the benchmark. So long story short is that 3 or 4 reasons why a lot of interest is being taken as far as PMS and AIF is concerned. Last thing, I'll leave you with one thought. If you see even the Western world, the big news is always that money is moving from active mutual funds to passive. I don't know how many of us have actually seen the data more closely. While the big news is that active is moving into passive, the bigger news is that bulk of active is actually moving into alternates. That's a bigger trend than the trend of moving from active to passive. And even in the Western world, if you see 20, 30 years back, the biggest of marquee names you heard like Anthony Bolton or, Peter Lynch, they were all mutual fund managers. In today's world, which are the marquee names you're hearing in the Western world? They all are alternate managers, right? So I think world over, it's not only in India, world over, there is a trend where savvy investors or investors who have much more expectation from their investment, they typically tend to move into alternate space.
So where do you see this AIF and PMS industry? If you have to quantify in terms of number, where do you see 5 years down the line, the total AUM put together can be?
Very difficult to put a number. And there is a reason to why I'm saying that difficult to put a number is because I personally feel that the whole capital market space itself is going to explode in the next 5 to 10 years. And when I say capital market space, it is everything to do with, insurance, asset management, broking, market intermediaries, fintech, digital, the whole space. The reason is because if you ask me, there is a certain change, like habits change with generations. So moving from fixed income into capital markets, or moving from government guaranteed schemes, or moving from PSU deposits into capital market oriented products, this has been a long trend of last 15, 20 years. But in the recent times, it has got accelerated. And now interest rates are not going back to that 9-10%. I don't think so. So the whole point is that, there is an acceleration in terms of adoption of capital markets. And on top of it, the whole culture of adoption of digital technology has only accelerated or expedited that whole thing. Correct? So I feel that it will be multifold. I mean, in the last 8-9 years, I gave you numbers which show that it has gone up. Depending on whether you're talking equity mutual fund, PMS or AIF, it has gone up 10-20 times in the last 8-9 years. My sense is it will accelerate further in the next 5 to 7 years.
Ashish, we come across with many investors who have been investing in equity mutual funds for over a decade, 1.5 decades, almost 2 decades. There are a few investors. And one of the things they keep talking about is their returns are always in and around the benchmark. And the reason they want to come and invest in PMS as a vehicle is they feel that they can get some differentiated offerings. Do you agree to this point, or you feel that no, the returns would be in line with each other and there would not be a differentiation from an
See, it's like this. Yeah, see, it's like this. Ultimately, a PMS or a mutual fund or a AIF is a regulatory license, a type of regulatory license. And each of these types of regulatory license come with different operating construct, and they come with different amount of latitude being given to the investment manager, right? So each of them, but the whole point is that ultimately the return comes from the stocks which you own and the credibility or competence of the portfolio manager, right? So there is portfolio manager, and then there are the stocks and the companies that you're owning. These are the two things which are most important. But at the same time, the operational construct, whether it is PMS or mutual fund, right, that ultimately it matters. First, a couple of things I already told you that, in a PMS, for instance, there is commercial latitude, how you can structure is different. Second is there is investment latitude, what you can do and cannot do also is very different from what a mutual fund is allowed. And then there are a few more differences. Like, for example, according to me, the biggest benefit of a PMS is that my portfolio is in my Demat account, right? So when 23rd March 2020 comes, how I react will determine my future, correct? See what happens in a mutual fund. Ultimately, it's a mass retail vehicle. The actions in a mutual fund are basically caused by the sum total behavior of hundreds of thousands of people at any given point in time. So on 23rd March 2020, if I am running a mutual fund scheme which had an inflow, then I would be a buyer. On 23rd March 2020, if you were unfortunately running a scheme which had net outflow, then it doesn't matter what you say on CNBC. Basically, you're a seller, right? In a PMS, it doesn't work that way. In a PMS, Vikas's portfolio is in Vikas's Demat account. Ashish's portfolio is in Ashish's Demat account. If you sell, all the stocks held in your Demat will be sold and money will be paid to you. But the day when you are selling, I might be a buyer. So at 700 rupees, I may have got a credit entry of HDFC Bank and you may have got a debit entry of HDFC Bank in your Demat account. The other important thing is that transparency in a PMS is of a very, very high order. So, at what price, what did you buy? At what price, what did you sell? Why did you sell? Now, the investors, need maturity to handle that transparency. In a mutual fund, ultimately, you just see an NAV. You have no clue what the guy is actually doing, right? So you need the maturity. I always tell people on a lighter note that, when you are investing in a mutual fund, it's like doing surgery with anesthesia. And when you're in a PMS, it's like undergoing surgery without anesthesia. Many times you will feel like jumping off the operating table because you will feel, what is he buying and what is he selling? But you need the maturity to handle that transparency. I think PMS is the most transparent vehicle that exists in the industry, right? So I think that your question, about can it produce better outcomes? I think yes, PMS and AIF, because of the latitude, they can produce better outcomes. And let me also caveat this that I'm not prejudiced or I don't have any favorites in any manner. My entire 21 years in the industry, I've always worked in AMCs, which offer both these services. So I have no reason to favor one over the other. But if you ask me, where would I keep my money? It is in PMS.
Sure, understood. But within the PMS industry, Ashish, there is one school of thought which is buy and hold or concentrated portfolio. On the other hand, there are a lot of new portfolio managers entering in. For example, Abacus is one portfolio manager, and there are many more entries started from mutual fund IDFC to Old Bridge Asset Management Company, and there are many more entrants. Now, there is always been a discussion between active versus passive, and of late these new managers. When I look at their portfolio, I'm saying as an intermediary or as an advisor, I see the number of stocks are much more than what it used to be earlier. Whereas PMS was earlier perceived as only a concentrated portfolio. So what is your sense? Is there anything right or wrong about it, or it's a different style, or can you throw some more lights on that?
So I would put it this way, like concentration versus, like there is concentrated portfolios. Then like how in my previous organization at MO, we used to always communicate about a focused portfolio. See, I mean, typically, if you ask me in my book, anything which is 10, 15 stocks is concentrated. Anything which is 20, 25 stocks, meaning you have chunky positions like 4, 5%. And then there are more diversified portfolios, right? Like 40 stocks or 45 stocks or so. Secondly, if you ask me, even in terms of, you mentioned that, there are managers who have a very long, long view of holding onto their positions. And then there are some managers who may have a slightly higher turnover as compared to. So on your question, I would first say that there's frankly, no right and wrong. And it's not about my saying there's no right and wrong. The reality is that you have seen that each of these people under certain market circumstances or at different points in time have had stellar performance. Correct? Now, what I have learned over my couple of decades is that actually when you have a concentrated portfolio, right, or when you have a diversified portfolio, these are people who are aiming for two different things. So best not to compare. Similarly, if somebody has a very growth oriented and somebody has a approach of buying, deep value, contrarian, cyclical, value unlocking, low PE, price to book, right? So growth versus value, highly concentrated versus diversified. What does this do actually? You are putting yourself into a particular bracket or into a particular slot. When you have a very, very well-defined style, it slots you in a nimble-footed animal. Because if you see, whatever your style may be, your style always operates juxtaposed on a particular market context, right? And when macros change, when government policies change, then market context also changes, right? So my learning is that if you have a portfolio which is balanced for style, which means that you have a balance of cyclical versus defensive, growth versus value. And the other thing I would say that when you have a diversified portfolio, it's just that it makes you work harder. I don't think one should assume that if somebody has a diversified portfolio means that their conviction is lower. It's just that if you have 30, 40 stocks, then you will have to have that many more people who have to do that much more in-depth coverage of those 30, 40 stocks, right? But why would you run 30, 40 stocks? Is because it's not right or wrong. It's your preference. When you run a portfolio of 30, 40 stocks, basically what you're saying is that I would like to have more components in my portfolio so that I can balance for all kinds of style tilts. I would want value-biased components in the portfolio and growth-biased components in the portfolio. I want cyclical components in the portfolio and I want defensive components in the portfolio. And I want to be across sectors. I don't want just pharma or FMCG, and I don't want just PSU banks and metals, right? So I think that it's more about what is the recipe that the guy is following and what is he aiming for. Like if I want to have a consistent alpha, and if I want to have a low fluctuation in my alpha, and if I want to beat the market in all conditions, then I need a diversified portfolio with very less style tilts. But if I have a concentrated portfolio with only one style, like let's say I am highly quality oriented and I have a portfolio of 10 stocks, there'll be phases when I will have a very high alpha and there'll be phases where I'll have a significant underperformance. So it's just that the investor and the advisor needs to know what they're buying and what is the manager aiming for and under what circumstances will it outperform or underperform. So, like for example, when I was at MO, I remember we used to always say that over a period of 5 years, if the EPS tracks in a particular direction, then stock prices will follow. And, the holding period of stocks was that much. So investors also need to match that horizon, right? So whatever is the style, that is what needs to be communicated and that is what needs to be well understood. I don't think there are rights or wrongs. I think different people are aiming for different things.
So it is the investor and along with his advisor who needs to work closely, understand the asset allocation pattern, style of investment, and then kind of allocate money.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you need to understand what is the manager managing for, what is the manager aiming for. I think those are the things that needs to be understood, and you need to align yourself with that. Like when we manage people, we say that don't hire fishes and then expect them to climb a tree, right?
Sure. Ashish, before we come to now the main aspect of understanding more about White Oak and investment philosophy, last question as far as this topic is concerned. So what are the 3-4 things that you see differentiates PMS from AIF? Now it's between AIF and PMS.
See, AIF is, if you ask me, a mutual fund is a fund structure, right? So a lot of, I mentioned the things about investment latitude, operational latitude, commercial latitude, etc. But one thing about a mutual fund is that which only can happen in a mutual fund. That, you read about me, you go to my website, you click a button, you become my customer, it takes 30 seconds. So mutual funds have great operational advantage and convenience, right? PA, on the other hand, while it has all the latitude which I spoke about, but it takes so many days to sign so many papers and do a demat account and a power of attorney and a custody account and zillion other things, right? And however much we try, we still have some legs which needs some Aadhaar OTP or which needs some power of attorney stamp paper to be signed. So many things are there. Now AIF, if you ask me, is the best of both worlds because it has the operational cuteness of a mutual fund, but it preserves the latitude of a PMS. So AIF is more like a go-between. It's it's a more convenient way. I would say it has pretty much all the characteristics of a PMS, but the operational convenience of a mutual fund. That's how I would put it.
Now, since you've taken over as a CEO at Avito Capital, and this organization I know is about 5 years old in India. However, we saw that the PMS scheme was launched in 2019. Before that, the AIF was launched. So this question is something that I keep getting, and a lot of investors don't know. So if you could take us through the history of the organization, how it was founded, how old it is, and what track record it brings.
Sure.
Over to you.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been here for now pretty much 10 to 11 months, say just under a year actually. But like you rightly pointed out, the organization was founded in June 2017 by a gentleman called Prashant Khemka, who's our founder actually. And Prashant, before founding White Oak, he was with Goldman Sachs for about 17 years. And in his last role at Goldman Sachs, he was CIO for their India equity as well as global emerging markets strategies. And has a very long track record of managing Indian equity funds. So right from, he was the person who founded Goldman Sachs India equity funds. As you are aware, one of the largest foreign portfolio investors into India has been Goldman Sachs. So from 2007 till 2017, consistently, he was managing Goldman Sachs India equity fund. And from 2013 to 2017, then of course, India became a subset of his domain because he became CIO for global emerging markets. So he founded the firm in 2017. And of course, we have a 22-member equity research team. In fact, 2-3 things which differentiate us. One is that, it's a team within team approach. So for practically every stock and sector, we have 2 or 3 people who are covering. So while we have a 22-member team, let's say financial services, within that 22 for covering financials, there is again a sub team of 3 to 4 people. Then pharma and chemicals will be again a team of another 2 to 3 people. IT will be another team of 2 to 3 people. So more like a team within team approach. Yeah, I mean, you're right. A lot of people may not have heard about us in India because you're right. Like, the PMS came in 2019 because when the firm was founded originally, it started managing more, global investors' money being invested into India. So like we are talking in capacity of a PMS and AIF manager, within White Oak Group, we also have an entity, White Oak Capital Partners in Singapore, which is a Monetary Authority of Singapore licensed asset management company. So we manage about just under $4 billion we manage for foreigners investing into India. And all of those funds are domiciled in London, Dublin, and Mauritius. And as far as domestic is concerned, we are, say, more like 900 million AUM. Which is mainly PMS and AIF.
So Ashish, you always believe in having a full clarity when it comes to investment philosophy. So what investment philosophy White Oak follows, and what are the stock selection process, if you can take us through?
So, when it comes to investing, like I mentioned, it's a team-based approach. Pretty much a large team which covers, like I said, team within team approach. So the key driver is actually the team and the team-based decision making, right? And that gives a lot of depth in terms of coverage. coming to the philosophy itself, I would put it this way, that we look for three things in any business or any company that we are evaluating. One is that we are looking for companies with a very high level of governance, right? A lot of the team's effort goes into actually into ascertaining the governance. So first is we look for governance. Second is we look for companies which generate free cash flow over and above their cost of capital. So high level of incremental return on invested capital. Third thing, most important is we look for long-term scalable opportunities. So high governance, free cash flow over and above cost of capital. And third is, if companies have both of these, then they should be operating in a scalable business opportunity, right? So these are the three things we look for. And most importantly, if you see, for example, when it comes to valuation, I specifically mentioned we look for companies which generate free cash flow over and above their cost of capital, or after paying for their cost of capital. So we have our own proprietary framework. What I said is just a couple of sentences, but basically much deeper than that. We have our own proprietary valuation framework. So every company that we value, we put it through this OpCo-FinCo framework, which is actually a trademarked framework, more like proprietary to us. So that's what we follow. And like I mentioned, very importantly, in your previous question, when you were talking about styles of investing, we believe in running a balanced portfolio. So we don't take any top-down macro bets. We look at companies bottom up. But most importantly, when I say that we look for balanced portfolio construction, it means that when it comes to these things like growth versus value, cyclical versus defensive, low beta versus high beta, you will find that our factor tilts or style tilts are, we don't have any exaggerated style tilts. So we are not aiming for very high outperformance and then underperformance. What we are aiming for is consistent generation of alpha over and above BSE 500. So you will not find any exaggerated style tilts in the portfolio. Well, some style tilts can't be avoided because, we look for high governance. We generally don't invest in government-backed companies. We'll generally have half the portfolio in small and mid cap. So that does bring in some tilts or that does bring in some factor tilts in the portfolio. But we'll try to minimize the tilts and try to run as balanced a portfolio as we can.
One announcement for everyone. If you have any questions, please type in your question in Q&A box. I have one or two more questions and then we'll move to Q&A. Please type your questions in Q&A box and not in the chat box. Okay. Ashish, so as a house, when you follow a single strategy, then what are the difference between your AIFs and PMSs? And how do you run PMS? So is this a multi-cap or a mid-cap or large cap? So if you could throw some.
So as a house, we basically, like I mentioned, it's a conviction that we can generate significant alpha by investing in small and mid caps. So if you look at the PMS, for instance, almost half the portfolio is small and mid cap. So, the way to look at it is that 40 to 60 is a range, between 40 to 60% large cap and between 40 to 60% small and mid cap. That's how we run it. Now, when you talk about AIF versus PMS, clearly, most AIFs are closed-ended. And, and our AIFs are actually, we don't have any exit window. They are actually closed for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever the tenure may be. So because they are closed-ended, we typically end up having higher allocation to small and mid cap. So you should imagine this way, that let's say our PMS is 40-45% small and mid cap. Our AIFs could be as high as 55 to 60% in small and mid cap. So the belief is to run multi-cap strategies. But on your question, the difference between AIF and PMS is purely in terms of allocation to small and mid cap. AIFs will have much more small and mid cap allocation.
So can I say that your AIF and PMS both have a similar approach?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And
in fact, the name overlap could be, to answer more directly, the name overlap could be pretty high. Weightages would be different. And, net, the small and mid cap will be higher in AIF.
Okay. Now we'll move to Q&A. So I'm done with my questions. So the first question is, do you invest entire money in single day or wait or stagger your investments?
No, so we give all these facilities for systematic transfer and all. But otherwise, if we are instructed, we will invest the same day. will not, 80-85% would get invested. If we are moving in and out of some stocks, then maybe 10-15% might take a couple of days more. But basically, we'll invest everything same day.
But the choice is given to the investor if they opt for STP.
Yeah, if they opt for systematic transfer, clearly, that choice is given to the investor, but left it to us, we will not. Because, see, there is no way to time whether it is macro, whether it is market cycle, whether it is market direction. I don't really think there is any way to time it. And I'm not saying for sake of saying, even if I put some money into my own PMS, I always stagger it over the next few weeks or months.
Sure. Next question is, we've seen alpha coming down as AUM starts going up in case of PMS, especially in mid and small cap funds. So how do you plan to counter this?
So I think, when you're running pure small and mid cap funds, I'll give I have a different view actually, if you ask me. My view is that there are no very big small and mid cap PMSs really. 2,000 crore, 1,000 crore, 2,500 crore, 1,500 crore. Like our PMS is 4,000 crore. So let's say our small and mid cap allocation is below 2,000 crore, more like 1,800 to 2,000 crore. So if you really genuinely, if you believe my experience, I can say that 1,000, 2,000 crores is not a crazily big sum of money as far as small and mid cap is concerned. But the question is more on dedicated small and mid cap PMSs. And I feel that, the issue is not got to do with size. The issue is that the size goes up when the returns in small and mid cap goes up. So what happens is that money comes when there is performance, or money comes because of appreciation. The size might go up when there is actually performance. So size goes up when there is when the recent performance is good, and some money also might come in when the recent performance is good. And needless to say, small and mid cap, stock market is cyclical, but small and mid cap cycle is even deeper. Let me explain what I mean. In recent times, the Nifty has seen, before COVID, what was the range of Nifty? 12,400 and 7,700. Do you know what was the range of small cap index? 9,000 and 3,100. 66% fall from the peak. Correct? So that is what causes the pain or the underperformance or the outperformance. Now, what happens is that a lot of times if we have invested in small and mid cap in 2016, 2017, and if we start to draw a conclusion in 2020, that is what causes the problems. And I think there is a lot of input in that, or a learning in that for investors, advisors, as well as managers. When does money come in and when does the size go up? That is more important than the absolute size itself. I think that is the key point.
The next question is, how will the accredited investor framework change the landscape? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll see. In just before that, I want to add one more thing on the previous question, that if you see after all the ups and downs, small cap index went from 9,000 to 3,100, and now it has retraced pretty much everything. You will see alpha, because the index है ना, अगर index घूम फिर के same जगह पे आया है, still you will find that slowly the outperformance is actually coming back. So if you live through the cycle, your experience will be very different. If you see from top to bottom or bottom to top, your experience will be very different. Now, anyway, coming to this whole, accredited investor framework, I think it is good. In fact, the positive aspect of it, which I found, was that it is proposed that accredited investors, they don't need to stick to the minimum amounts, which means that, see, let's say if you're an accredited investor and you want to invest in an AIF. Now, today, the minimum to invest in an AIF is 1 crore. But if you're an accredited investor, you can give a smaller amount just to experiment, because being an accredited investor, it is assumed that you know what you are doing. See, right now, what are they saying? That if you put 1 crore in an AIF, if it is an AIF, you have to put minimum 1 crore. Meaning that AIF is a slightly high risk, high return proposition. It is illiquid. So I assume that if you are putting money in an AIF and you are meeting a minimum of 1 crore, I'm assuming that you are a guy who can take risk and you are a guy who is smart or who understands what you are doing. They have reversed this. They are saying that if you are designated as an accredited investor, then you can put any amount in a AIF. So those minimums are not to be necessarily adhered to if you are an accredited investor. I found that to be interesting because, a lot of people will, if you're an accredited investor, you will be able to experiment with products. And, you can do some kind of trial or, because in financial products, there is no trial, or there is no testing. But at least with a smaller amount, if you can do it, I think that might work out. And the other important thing is that, these are good evolution as far as regulation is concerned. Because generally, when you look at mutual funds, see, a few minutes back, I told you that mutual funds, the whole regulation has straight-jacketed it, right? This is large cap, this is mid cap, this is small cap. Why is it being done? It is being done so as to make it easier to understand, so as to narrow down the risk return outcomes, and to make it safer or standardized to participate for the retail investors. Now, in the process of standardizing, are we commoditizing? That's the whole question. So if accredited investors regulation is segregated, then clearly there can be a lot more innovation for the people who are accredited investors, and there can be a lot of standardization and protection for people who are retail investors. The universe can be segregated. I think that's the important point.
Yeah, the next question is, what's the criteria for stock sell in your portfolio and how frequently it is done in both AIF and PMS?
See, that's what I think when Vikas, you asked that question about investing philosophies and styles. What happens is that at our end, we are pretty clear that we are evaluated for relative performance, which means that, let's put it this way, that in the year 2017, everybody had 50-60% return. In a year when everybody has 50-60% return, if I give 30% return, you won't be happy with me. In the year 2018, everybody had negative return. So investors are pretty smart. When everybody has negative return, you're not expecting me to give you 30% return. So when everybody has negative return, if I have 4-5% positive return, I would be considered to be a best performer. So at our end, our objective is pretty clear that we are trying to generate maximum outperformance over BSE 500 total return index at any given point in time. So when you have a long when you have a long holding period, if you're going to buy a stock and hold it for next 5 to 7 years, there's nothing wrong with it. Ultimately, if the EPS trajectory hits as per the hypothesis, then the stock will also give those kind of returns. And that may help you to beat the benchmark also over a period of time. But that is more an absolute return kind of focus. As far as we are concerned, we are trying to maximize outperformance over the benchmark. So from that perspective, even if a stock can give great returns over 5 to 7 years, we consistently remind ourselves that we would need to beat or outperform our peers as well as BSE 500 on a more consistent basis. Hence, I would say we are very, very valuation conscious. So if you look at it this way, that any low churn portfolio might have 10 to 15% turnover in a full year. A typical mutual fund has anywhere between 100 to 150% turnover in a full year. At our end, the turnover is more 40 to 50%. That's how I would put it. And so the question was that how fast we sell or when we sell. Our average holding period for a stock is like 2.5 years. We don't trade like a mutual fund, but definitely it's not 5 years. It's more like between 2 to 3 years. That's the average holding period.
Next question is, how are the redemption under CAT 3 AIF managed to be accurate or error free? Do you see some errors? Not sure.
No. So in our case, okay, maybe I'm the right person to answer because we don't allow redemptions. Our AIFs are actually absolutely locked up. I mean, it's completely close-ended. So there is a AIF subscription or a drawdown period, and then there is maturity. There's nothing in between. There are no redemptions. But I think as far as the question is concerned, because of my experience, I can say that there is no issue. I mean, an AIF pays redemption based on NAV. It's just like a mutual fund. So I don't see there is any reason for error for a AIF to have, when
gone through some different scenarios. So maybe he's asking. So Mr. Sanghvi, if you have any question, you can let me know. We can try and resolve that offline. The next question is White Oak planning IPO based or pre-IPO fund? If not, then why? Oh.
So we do see at White Oak, Look, we are not in favor or averse to IPOs, right? We actually believe that there are very many times when look, one can't say that I will not buy IPOs. The general wisdom is that when a promoter is selling, he will optimize the time to sell, or he will maximize his price when he's selling. But I think that's not the right impression to carry. The reason being that even promoters know what expectations to set, and what is the business trajectory going to be, and at what pace the business can actually deliver. So I don't think there is one rule which fits. Second thing is that all great companies, right from Maruti to Infosys to whichever you look at it, they all came somewhere in an IPO at some point in time, right? So I don't think everybody knows that the IPO is perfectly timed, or next 3 years earnings are captured in the listing price and all. I don't think there is any accurate physics behind it. It's just that when there are companies with great potential, when there are companies which are otherwise not available in the market, if they are coming with an IPO, then one would look at it with an open mind. So we do participate in IPOs, we do invest in new listings, but we don't have any separate fund for that, and we don't have any plan immediately to do anything of that type.
All right. So last question before we conclude the session. So what are your house views as far as market is concerned, Ashish? Where do you see markets, both in short term and long term?
So as a house, I'll first tell you, as a house, we always believe that the market is fairly valued. Okay. But within that otherwise fairly valued market, it is our job. See, because I said we are absolutely we are totally relative return focused. So our main aim is to maximize outperformance for our clients over the BSE 500 total return index. Outperformance over BSE 500 and outperformance over our peers, because it's a competitive sport. That's how I would put it, right? So how we always assume that market is fairly valued, and in an otherwise fairly valued market, it is our task to identify opportunities which we think are more attractively valued relative to their future free cash flow forecasts and whatever modeling that we perform at our end, right? So that's how we operate. I believe that the question, needless to say, is more about market direction and what are the expectations. A couple of months back, I wrote an article, which the article was written in English in Outlook Money, but the title was deliberately, it said, "Have you seen a Teji?" I personally feel that we've begun a new economic cycle, and most people find it unbelievable because in the last 7-8 years we never saw. See, there are two times when we've seen a big economic cycle, from early 90s to 96, and then from 2003 to 2008. These were times of serious growth as far as our economy is concerned. 2003 to 2008, nominal GDP growth was double digits, and corporate EPS growth was 20-25% year-on-year compounded, right? Now, when these kind of things happen, that is when you really see, markets in their full, full bloom. Let me put it that way. Unfortunately, in the last 7 or 8 years, and I recently read somewhere the CEO of the largest broking company in India, Zerodha, he mentioned that average age of all their clients is 30 years, which means that most of them have never seen 2003 to 2008 or 90 to 96, and they've not seen what happens when the economy grows at double digit and corporate EPS growth at double digit. What actually happens? Most people haven't experienced it. And if you follow social media, or if you actually follow popular discourse, I think calling a bubble seems to be in fashion. I am not in that camp really. I am far more constructive. And I generally anyway believe that equity is for optimists. If you believe that human beings are the next dinosaur, then this is not the right place to be in.
Why am I asking you this question is, you see, we always look at last 10 years of average Nifty P, and then now there is huge migration so-called from 20P to 40.
See, I think past Ps, look, unfortunately, past Ps become difficult to compare, isn't it? Because if you see, inflation rates, interest rates, they're not comparable. Let's put it this way, that when I started my career, the government of India was issuing RBI was issuing on behalf of government of India RBI relief bonds at 11% tax free, and it was risk free also. So the bond market was at 9 times PE multiple. Correct? Risk-free, tax-free was 9 times PE multiple. So the bond market was so attractively valued. Today, the bond market is, what is risk-free and tax-free in India today? 4%, right? I mean, the government bond is 6 quarters, 6.5, or wherever it is, right? And on that, if you try to do tax-free and all those things, let's put it this way, that the bond PE multiple is 18 to 20 times or 16 to 17 times, correct? So when the bond PE has gone from 9 to 16 for the risk-free, then how can we compare equity PE multiple to equity PE multiple of today? So interest rates, interest rates play a big role in determining how PE multiples and rate of discounting and stuff will actually move. And if you have a minute, I just want to give an example. Let's look at it this way. Before FY21, right, or before this particular last couple of quarters, इसके पहले अगर आप देखिएगा, for 4 to 5 years, the EPS growth was practically zero, right? And the market tried to go up, but there were disappointments. So what happens is that, let us say that if Nifty PE was consistently in the range of, say, 480, 490, or 500, or some such number, okay? Consistently in the range of, say, 500 Nifty PE. Now, when Nifty PE is consistently 500 for, EPS, not PE, Nifty EPS was, let's say, 500, okay? If it is consistently 500 and the index goes to 15,000, so definitely, it keeps getting stretched, right? 15,000 becomes 16,000, 16,000 becomes 17,000. Then with the 500 base, obviously the market is getting stretched in one direction. But what if actually there is corporate EPS growth of 15% year on year? In 5 years, what will happen? The number will become, from 500 will become 1,000. See, पिछले 5 साल में तो 500 का 500 है. जितनी बार किसी ने बोला ना तेजी आएगा, उतनी बार डिमोनेटाइजेशन, जीएसटी, रेरा, आईएलएफएस डिफॉल्ट, कोविड, बैड बजट, चाइना का डिवैल्यूएशन, ऑयल बिकेम 29, मेटल प्राइसेस क्रैश्ड. सो पिछले 5 साल का बात सही है. व्हेनेवर समबडी टोल्ड अस कि तेजी आएगा, तो हमने देखा कोई तेजी नहीं है, घूम फिर के निफ्टी ईपीएस 500 पे है. तो तब का बात बराबर है. Now look at it this way, that next 5 years, whatever people have been saying, nominal GDP growth of double digit and Nifty EPS growth actually comes at double digit. तो 5 साल में 500 का EPS नंबर 1000 हो जाएगा, राइट? अच्छा, जब बाजार में तेजी शुरू होने वाली थी, that time Nifty PE was, let's say, 30 times. जो आप बोल रहे हैं stretched है, जो भी है वो 30 है. Do you know that बाजार तेजी के एक्सपेक्टेशन में निफ्टी का PE 30 है? तो 5 साल में EPS 500 का 1000 होगा, when there is demonstrated track record, तब उसका PE फिर से 30 तो बनता है ना. एक्चुअली तो 35 या 40 हो जाएगा, बिकॉज पीपल विल एक्सट्रापोलेट दैट इनटू द फ्यूचर. तो 15,000 का निफ्टी 30,000 अनबिलीवेबल है क्या? मैं ये नहीं बोल रहा हूँ होगा, बट इज इट अनबिलीवेबल? सी, इन द पॉइंट इज दैट when you get actually a growth in EPS, when 500 EPS becomes 1,000 and you apply the same PE multiple on 1,000, the Nifty will be in a completely different trajectory. Correct? What is the problem today? The problem today is that this 15,500, why it is unbelievable? Because एक साल पहले 7,600 था. So then we have to question ourselves that did it deserve to go to 7,600? Is that the right framework? Is that the right benchmark? The reality is it didn't deserve to गया 7,600 क्योंकि हमको लगा 5% केस फेटालिटी रेट 5% आएगा. सब लोग स्पेनिश फ्लू को कंपेयर कर रहे थे. 6 महीने में वैक्सीन तो आ नहीं सकता है. What will the Federal Reserve and the RBI and all the governments do? We saw in global financial crisis, we saw what they did. But what they did in 2020 was 10x of what they did in global financial crisis. केस फेटालिटी रेट 5% पे नहीं आया, less than 1% है. 6 महीने में वैक्सीन भी आ गया. So the point is that when the market went to 7,600, we had assumed that human beings are dinosaurs. That's why it went to 7,600. But it so happened that human beings were not dinosaurs. The central banks and the governments also did their job. The vaccine also came and the economy sprung back. So Today we are finding 15,500 hard to digest because we are comparing everything with 7,600. Is that the right comparison? We have to ask ourselves, because before COVID we were at 12,500. So I think that, this needs, it's fashionable to call a bubble, but it needs a bit more broader perspective is what I would say.
Yeah, the last question from my end. So do you see as a house that the current economic situation is giving you some sense, like IIP numbers, etc., that the EPS growth will continue? Because we've been expecting this EPS growth to come in from 2015 onwards. So as a house, do you recognize some fact and numbers if you can bring on the table?
See, whenever somebody says that, let's say how does the economic cycle get the fodder or get the fuel? Generally, it starts with, low leverage on corporate balance sheets, low interest rates, high liquidity, banks raising capital, availability of capital with banks, system level leverage being low. So these are all the ingredients. Global macro being benign, the whole world trying to get growth back. See, in 2018-19, what was our problem? In 2019, when the corporate tax was cut, what were we thinking? That our sovereign default will get downgraded. Sovereign rating will get downgraded because we are acting profligate. And why we didn't have elbow room to engender, or why didn't we have elbow room to have a loose monetary policy, loose fiscal policy and engender growth? Because we were thinking that US economy is at a crescendo. US is going to start tightening. If US will start tightening, how can we have elbow room? Currency can go to 80, 90, whatever. Sovereign rating can get downgraded. 2019 mein ye sab tha. That's why we were very fearful of having a accommodative policy. But see what has happened in 2021. We can run an accommodative policy. We can go in the budget and say that our deficit will be 7%. Jo karna hai karo. Why we can say that? Because the whole world is trying to get the growth back. So if you are trying to get growth back, you're not out of place. You're not out of sync, right? So the external environment, at least for now, is conducive, and many other things are there. And plus, the government has announced dramatic, significant, far-reaching reforms. And plus, when everybody's talking about China plus one, in some sectors that plus one could be Vietnam, Philippines, or Bangladesh, or whoever. But I'm sure in many sectors that plus one is India also, and you can see it very clearly. You can see record-breaking FDI. You can see that many sectors India is becoming a preferred, destination for a local market as well as for an export market. So I think that we must participate. You should watch your asset allocation. You can determine how to participate, lump sum, STP, how much money to allocate. All those things are very personal decisions. But I think that this is not a time to be pessimistic. That's how I would put it.
All right. So with that, we'd like to conclude the session. Ashish, thank you so much for taking the time out from your busy schedule and joining in today and addressing all the questions so patiently. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me. All the best.
Yeah, thank you, dear participants. So if you have any more questions for Ashish or me, please feel free to write to me at vikas@aifpms.com, and I'll ensure that I'll get them answered from Ashish. So thank you so much for joining in. We look forward to see you next session.
Thank you.